And welcome. Thank you for joining me in part number 21 in this fabulous book, Muhammad Sal'la'laa'hu A'layhi Was'sal'lam, his life based on the earlier sources by Martin Lings. We are busy today with chapter number 8, which is his life in the desert. As we mentioned, there were a lot of epidemics in Mecca, and the people in Mecca would send the newborn babies into the desert because the infant mortality rate was very, very high in Mecca. So it was not only the desert's fresh air that they wished the sons to imbibe, that was for their bodies, but the desert also had its bounty for the souls. Quraysh had only recently taken to the sedentary life until Qusay had told them to build. Remember, Qusay was the king of the Quraysh. Qusay had told them recently. Qusay had told them to build themselves houses around the sanctuary. That was known as the Quraysh of the Hollow. They had been more or less nomadic. Fixed settlements were perhaps inevitable, but they were dangerous. Their ancestors' way of life had been the nobler one, the life of tent dwellers. So that was a more nomadic way of life, but it was a more purer life. The people were more healthier, moving from tent to tent. As the season changed, in winter they wrap up the tent, go to the summer areas. In summer they wrap up the tents and go to the warmer or cooler climates. So they were on the way, nomadic lifestyle. So that was more healthier way of living. So the ancestors' way of life had been the nobler one, the life of tent dwellers, often on the move. Nobility and freedom were inseparable, where the nomad was free. In the desert, a man was conscious of being the lord of space, this vastness of space, and in virtue of that lordship, he escaped in a sense from the domination of time. Time basically stood still. By striking camp, he sloughed off his yesterdays, and tomorrow seemed less of a fatality of its where as well as its when and yet to come. But the townsman was a prisoner. So if you're living in an urban environment, you're basically a prisoner of your time and yourself. To be fixed in one place, yesterday, today, tomorrow, you are a target for time, the ruiner of all things. So time it ruins yourself in an urban setting. Whereas in a rural setting, in the villages and in the desert, you are a master. You basically have more time, more luxury in your time. Everything decayed there. In the urban areas, everything decayed there. Towns were places of corruption. Sloth and slovenliness lurked in the shadow of their walls, ready to take the edge of a man's alertness and vigilance. Everything decayed there, even language, one of man's most precious possessions. So the language also became contaminated. Like we know today also, the pure, say if you're living in London, the pure British English gets contaminated with vulgar usage. So the pure Shakespearean English gets contaminated. Even in Arabia, the urban language, the pure Arab then starts getting contaminated. Whereas in the desert, they still have the pure Arabic. And the Prophet ﷺ said he learned the pure Arabic from the people of the desert. Even some few rare words, even other people would not know, he would know the absolute beautiful meaning of those words. So he learned the pure original Arabic language. So few of the Arabs could read, but beauty of speech was a virtue which all Arab parents desired for their children. A man's worth was largely assessed by his eloquence. So the more better he could speak, because in those days, eloquence, poetry, public speaking, that was like you had a doctor in your family or you had a scientist in your family. That's how valuable it was. And the crown of eloquence was poetry. And to have a great poet in the family was indeed something to be proud of. It's like, hey, we got a mayor in our family, or we got we got a hotshot in our family, we got a celebrity in our family. Oh, you got a poet in your family. Oh, wow, you got a celebrity in your family. And the best poets were nearly always from one or another of the desert tribes, for it was in the desert that the spoken language was nearest to poetry. So the ones who are living in the desert, they're the ones who always used to win the poetry competitions. So the bond with the desert had to be renewed in every generation. Fresh air for the breast, pure Arabic for the tongue, freedom for the soul, and many of the sons of Quraysh were kept as long as 8 years in the desert, so that it might make a lasting impression upon them, though a lesser number of years was enough for that. Some of the tribes had a high reputation for nursing and rearing children, and amongst these were the Bani Sa'd ibn Bakr, an outlying branch of Hawazin, whose territory lay to the southeast of Mecca. Amina was in favor of entrusting her son to the care of a woman of this tribe. They came occasionally to Quraysh for nurslings, and some were expected shortly. They were about to come. Their journey to Mecca on this occasion was described in the after years by one of the number, Halima, the daughter of Abu Du'ayb, who was accompanied by her husband Harith and a recently born son of their own, whom she was nursing. She recalled, and this is her story that she is saying, "It was a year of drought," she said, and we had nothing left. I set forth on a grey she-ass of mine, and we had with us an old she-camel, which could not yield even one drop of milk. We were kept awake all night by our son, who was crying all the time for hunger, for I did not have enough milk in my breast to feed him. And that ass of mine was so weak and so emaciated that I often kept the others waiting for me to catch up. She then told how they went on their way with nothing to hope for except a fall of rain, which would enable the camel and the ass to graze enough for the others to swallow a little. But by the time they reached Mecca, no rain had fallen. Once there, they set about looking for nurslings, and Amina offered her son first to one and then to the other, until finally she had tried them all, and they had all refused. No one wanted to take Amina's son. They did not want to take Prophet ﷺ. They did not know who he was. So Halima continues the story. That was because we hoped for some favors from the boy's father, she said. An orphan? We said. What will his mother and his grandfather be able to do for us? Nothing. Not that they would have wanted direct payment for their services, since it was considered dishonorable for a woman to take a fee for suckling a baby. The recompense they hoped for, though less direct and less immediate, was of a far wider scope. This interchange of benefits between townsman and nomad was in the nature of things, for each was poor where the other was rich, and rich where the other was poor. So it was like one hand washing the other hand. The nomad had the age-old God-given way of life to offer, the way of Abel, the sons of Cain, for it was Cain who built the first villages, had possessions and power. The advantage for the Bedouin was to make an enduring link with one of the great families. The foster mother gained a new son who would look on her as a second mother and feel a filial duty to her for the rest of her life. He would also feel himself a brother to her own children, nor was the relationship merely a nominal one. The Arabs hold that the breast is one of the channels of heredity, and that a suckling brings qualities into his nature from the nurse who suckles him. So as far as they were concerned, the one who suckles the breast, they're also getting the genetic inheritance into that new baby. So that is why they then become siblings. But little or nothing could be expected from the foster child himself until he grew up, and meantime his father could normally be relied on to fulfill the duties of his son. A grandfather was too remote, and in this case they would have known that Abdul Muttalib was an old man who could not reasonably be expected to live much longer. When he died, his sons, not his grandsons, would be his heirs. As to Amina, she was poor, and as to the boy himself, his father had been too young to have acquired wealth. He had left his son no more than 5 camels, a small flock of sheep. This is Abdullah we are talking about. Abdullah only had 5 camels, a small flock of sheep and goats, and 1 slave girl. Abdullah's son was indeed a child of one of the great families. That means Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was indeed one of the noble families, but he was by far the poorest nursling that these women were offered that year. On the other side, though the foster parents were not expected to be rich, they must not be too poverty-stricken, and it was evident that Halima and her husband were poorer than any of the companions. So on the one hand, we have Amina with a baby, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the poorest from the Quraysh, and we had Halima with her husband and her child, the poorest from the people of the desert. So poor is meeting poor. So it was evident that Halima and her husband were poorer than any of their companions. Whenever the choice lay between her and another, the other was preferred and chosen, and it was not long before every one of the Bani Sa'd women, except Halima, had been entrusted with a baby. Only the poorest nursed was without a nursling, and only the poorest nursling was without a nurse. Wow. Let's continue the story in the next episode. Stay well, look after yourself. Alhamdulillah.